All right, all right, all right. Who's in the building? Let me know. Press one. Press one, please, if you can hear me loud and clear. I think by now we're practiced. We know what's going on. We know what to do. Can you hear me loud and clear, family? I have a special guest for you guys this evening. Okay, thank you very much. We got our very first um we got our very first person in here. Darianosaurus. That's a cool name, that. Very good name. Wish I thought of that. It's too late now. I'm stuck with Trill Black. All right. Thank you so much for that. Joy and Neely. Thank you so much. Joy can hear me loud and clear. Um, okay. That's good. That's good. Okay, at least people can hear me loud and clear. Guys, I've got a very special guest for you guys tonight. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm drawing them in. I'm drawing them in, The the bold and the beautiful somehow attracted to this channel. And I've got someone a treat for you guys tonight. Um, Someone I've been watching for a long time, following for a long time. Someone I really respect. Wait for a few more of us to join the chat. We're supposed to start at 9:30, but sorry, not 9:30, 8:30 GMT, but you know, um, things happen. So, but we're here now. Hamsim Mohammed Jama. Let me know if I got that right. Says, let's go. Let's go. Come on. I like that. Okay, good. Good energy. Good energy. Um, my guest tonight, guys. So a lot of you don't know this, but I was writing a book. That's actually how I got involved in all of this. Okay. So a year or so after I got married, I started to write a book. And it was a book that my wife actually encouraged me to write. She said, look, do it. Just do it. Stop thinking about it. Just do it. Um, might never get published. Doesn't matter. Just do it. And I did it. And it's a book that's set, it's historical fiction. Okay. So I had to do a lot of research for this book. A lot of research for this book because I'm a 90s baby. And I set my book on the eve of the Second World War. And not just on the eve of the Second World War, but um, in a place that I just really shouldn't be, but it's far from my imagination. Pre-colonial Nigeria, which is my place of origin. So I had to do a lot of research for this book. A lot of research for this book. Okay. Um, Clay Raw. Okay, I see we got some knowledgeable people in the building. So is that who's in my picture for my thumbnail? Prince Bernhard of Belgium. Is it Prince Bernhard of Belgium or Holland? Would that be Holland? I didn't even know that. I know of the individual, but I couldn't tell you I know how he looks. Um, they all look the same. Ha ha ha. But yeah. So thank you for that, Clay Raw. But yeah, so I'm writing this book, and I know nothing about pre-colonial Nigeria. Sorry, well, know nothing about pre-colonial and colonial Nigeria. Um, but I'm setting my book in colonial Nigeria, colonial era Nigeria, where the British are in charge, firmly in control. Um, there are a few, n- you know, noises here and there about getting the British out, but all of that dies down as the Second World War starts, quite conveniently for the British. Anyway, I'm setting this book just before the Second World War is about to start, and I know nothing about that time and place. So I start my research. One of the people I come across doing this research, one of the people who I couldn't have finished my book without, is my guest. He has archived. If you think about this, right? I don't know how many people are familiar with Marvel. Okay, so I'm a massive comic head as well. Okay, and I used to collect them. I used to collect comics during a very sad time in my life. But I used to collect these comics, and one of my favorite characters from Marvel is a guy called the Watcher. And chat, let me know if you know who the Watcher is. Type two in the chat. Type two in the chat, and you're listening, and you know who the Watcher is from Marvel. Okay, and that's really who my guest is. He is the Watcher. He is, the Watcher is from a race of aliens, extraterrestrials who have immense knowledge and wisdom, and they've been around since forever. They just catalog the history of the universe, in fact multiverse. Okay, they catalog the history of the multiverse, and from this they're a race of immensely technologically advanced, incredibly technologically advanced individuals, and who are very mysterious and appear here and there throughout the Marvel lore. Now, that's who this guy is. He's a living, walking member of the Watchers race. If you go on his channel, I only even just discovered that he had a YouTube channel. Um, I mean, no, I knew of that before, but I rediscovered it recently. I kind of forgot in the milieu of doing everything I do, but I rediscovered this channel and it just rediscovered the treasure trove that is his channel. His name is, and I'll put the proper inflection on his name because I'm a Yoruba man and he's a Yoruba man himself. Adeyinka Makinde. Okay, Adeyinka Makinde. We would say Adeyinka Makinde, but really it's Adeyinka Makinde. Um, and that's the name of his channel. That's the name of his channel. It's just his name. It goes by, the name that he carries himself. Now he has he's a historian, a bona fide historian. He's a boxing enthusiast, and he's written a book on the life of a man, an incredible man called Dick Tiger. Dick Tiger, don't get it the wrong way around. That'd be a very, very bad mistake. Dick Tiger was one of the first, I think, the first undisputed African. I think it's middleweight and light heavyweight, and this guy was a Nigerian man from Igbo territory. And my guest has cataloged his life and written an amazing book about Dick Tiger. But he's also not just a boxing historian; he's a historian of the mafia and of the mob. He's written another book on the life of a fellow called Frankie de Paula. Frankie de Paula. Frankie de Paula is I don't know if there's a film about him yet, but there should be. And if there isn't, and they're gonna do a book, make a movie about him, um, my guest book should be. I can't imagine it not being referred to. He's been on the BBC. He's regularly on Russia Today, I believe. So he knows his stuff. Let me just say that he knows his stuff. I also believe he's an academic lawyer, so he lectures in law here in the UK. So we're having a guest on tonight that is knows his stuff. He's not a layman. And the topic of discussion, well, you're gonna find out as we start talking. Is I'd say pretty interesting, pretty interesting. Um, I've missed a lot. I'm sure I would have missed a lot. But let me have him on so that he can introduce himself, say hello to you guys, and then we get cracking. Um, let's see if I can do this nice and smoothly. Hello, Mr. Makinde.
Hello, how are you?
I'm not bad, thank you. I'm not bad, thank you, sir. Can you just say hello to our audience and yeah, my subscribers tonight? Just tell them a little bit
Hello,
about
audience.
yourself.
I don't know, do your audience come with a particular name? Do they follow you?
Trill
Like,
Nation, the
when
Trill
I say
Nation.
follow you, like some notorious people, one unmentionable guy in America, he's got these followers known as the Groypers and stuff.
No, they're not gropers. They're not gropers at all.
Oh, for sure,
But
for sure they will be.
chat, don't be offended. Don't be offended. I think I think
Of course not, of course not. Oh,
we'll call
some
ourselves the. I think they call themselves the Trill Nation, members of the Trill Nation.
okay, okay. Trill
Yeah.
Nation. That's good. Yeah, yeah. I thought so. I could have made an educated guess about that.
So yeah, just fill us in, Mr. Makinde, your background, and let's just start with how did you start um how did you start curating? I've already told the people about your channel. How did you? I think you've got even up to, if not more than 2,000 videos on your channel, and we're talking images that go back to American soldiers, black American soldiers going over to fight in solidarity with the Ethiopians in Abyssinia against the invading Italians. You got, I think, I'm pretty sure you've got videos that go back to that time, that era. How did you start curating all these videos on your channel? What led to that?
Well, I mean, I I think I first joined YouTube probably 2013 or so. And
Mm.
let's just say about, well, over that period, I began compiling playlists. And those playlists, I think they were automatically made public in those days. Now it's private, so you have to set it to public. And so the first large quantities of newsreels. Most of them are basically newsreels from Reuters, British Path, um, that sort of thing, ITN archives. Um, I was just doing it for personal love, and I still do it for that reason. It's just out of an interest of particularly Nigerian political history, because I noticed you did mention Ethiopia and other things. And I do post videos, newsreels, and discussion points in the community page to do with things like the old Rhodesia, later reconstituted as Zimbabwe. But it's fair to say it's dominated by Nigeria and, in particular, the years of military rule. So I was just getting this stuff from Reuters, which is all I what I put there is largely I haven't paid for it, but I've done some digging, and I just started compiling them, in a very chronological manner. And as I said, the one I mostly have frequented is Nigerian political history, and then people started picking up on it, you know, and certain Nigerian, groups, for instance, that were focused on history, would would pick up from it, maybe make some frames from it, and refer people to my channel. And so it just started growing massively after that. So I think what I was doing was, yeah, I've sort of become a kind of a public curator. This is something I've done all my life. I don't think I really ever got into making scrapbooks, but I certainly, always, collected books like yourself, in the old days, comics, that sort of thing. But certainly, mostly books, magazines, that sort of thing. And so this is just the online version of that. And the whole idea also was that I wouldn't just be putting them in a playlist. I would add I would add to it, I would add I would reframe things. Sometimes these archives can have certain mistakes in them. Or and a lot of the time, because if they're from the 1960s, 1970s, they don't have the full picture, what happened next afterwards. So my posts would normally feature notes about what happened and giving further information about what's in the video. So really just started compiling that. And I have a general interest in history, wars, uh, military coups in places other than Africa. And so just compiling all of this stuff, and people just cottoned on to it and seemed to see some value, or in other cases, a lot of value in what I was doing. And so, yeah, that's basically how it happened.
One of the things I noticed as I watched more and more of the reels you compiled was that you're not. A lot of the times, history comes with narratives, right? It comes with editorials. But as you're just watching unedited, unfiltered events, you start to see that actually, without the editorializing that we get in the media, a lot of history is actually very different to what we've been told. So, for example, today. I'm watching back some of your stuff, and I'm seeing the Congo crisis. Um, and I'm seeing, first of all, I didn't even realize um, that happened. The assassination of Patrice Lumumba, that happened at breakneck speed. You had Congo, I think, gained independence when, what, 1960?
1960.
And by the end of that year, Lumumba, the linchpin, the central character in that gain of that independence, is dead. And one of the things that emerges also is the fact that um how intimately involved the Belgians were. There are clips on there of Belgian mercenaries and European mercenaries openly, braggadociously saying, yeah, we're killing Africans, we're unaliving Africans. Um, and but when people talk about some of these events now, it's almost very it's almost sanitized, at least in terms of the West's influence, in these events. Um, did you intend um were you intending to put out a certain narrative as you're collating these things, or you're just collating them and that general picture just becomes apparent? And were you yourself fascinated as you're curating these things? Are you yourself fascinated at some of the things that you're seeing and finding and putting together?
I mean, I think for most of them, I would put down things that the actual news agency, the way they saw it. So normally there would be a verbatim clip of sorry, or text of what was, you know, reported at the time. And then I would add a note or a series of notes at the bottom. So I try to be as neutral as possible, particularly, with the Nigerian stuff, which was, and in some ways, is still my main priority. Give both sides of the story in my addendums. And obviously, there's a discussion page where people can come
Mm.
and discuss things because I'll probably post a picture of some sort. And people will then migrate there and have their words on it. Now, if you take something like Lumumba, um, I write a few notes on a lot of the videos, not all of them, because there are various things that happened. For instance, at the time Lumumba died, people did not know what had happened to him. They knew he had been kidnapped because he was making that slow journey. He probably could have survived if he hadn't kept on stopping on the way to seek safety when he escaped from the UN protectors, because the Ghanaian forces were trying to protect him. Kwame Nkrumah was obviously an ally of his. And, he was captured. Nobody knew what had happened to him, although many people feared the worst. So his exact date of death is January 17th, 1961. But his death wasn't revealed until the next month. So these sorts of comments I will add to the videos that I'll upload. Some of them I'll just put it out there with minimal comment. Other times I will most certainly expand on it. So in many ways, it depends on how well educated a person is in history. As you know, there was a problem in Nigeria, probably still is, about the teaching of history for several decades. And not out of the ignorance people may have of events, was through no fault of theirs. If the education system is not primed to inform them of these things. But if we, the Lumumba situation, it's another thing, example of an item I've put several times for discussion in my page. But if you look at the uploads that I've done, you'll find that one would say more. Like there was another one of the videos or the newsreels I've uploaded about Congo. It's voiceless, and this is something that some people can be off. Modern people, young people, they don't realize in those days that they didn't always travel around with sound recordists and stuff like that. They would hand these newsreels distributed to world news readers around the world, and they'll just be reading a script as this is being played. But that video, that newsreel I was talking about, I was going to mention about the King of Belgium going to speak to the newly independent Congolese parliament.
Mm,
And the original text, which I put there, it's very, very mundane. Mr. Lumumba said this, King, blah, blah, said that. But my addendum would show, hey, this had great implications because the Belgians, the country as a whole, the apparatus, the military security apparatus, who were still entrenched on Congolese soil, they took what Lumumba said as an insult because Lumumba
mm.
had spoken about exploitation. So, in that sense, yeah, I would just say objectively, I've tried to, in most of these newsreels, set people straight about the history of things, what happened before, what happened after. Doesn't matter whether
Mm.
it's Nigeria or assassination of Lord Mountbatten or newsreel on Rhodesia or mercenaries in Africa. I'll always put some sort of a background to it.
Lord Mountbatten, um, he's British royal family, isn't he?
Yes.
How was he
I
assassinated?
think through Queen Victoria, Battenberg, German. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, it's very fascinating. He comes up a lot. There's almost nothing going on in his lifetime in terms of empire and international British politics that he's not involved in somehow. How was he assassinated?
Oh, a bomb by the Provisional IRA when he was on holiday in the
Wow,
Republic of Ireland.
wow.
And some mystery still surrounds that because there's some nasty, I don't think there are rumors anymore about what he did in his private life. And so it
Okay, yeah.
wasn't just the Irish Republican Army trying to make a point about targeting a senior member of the royal family and a figurehead of the British military, because apart from his naval career, he ended up at the pinnacle. I mean, his father, the original, their name was originally Battenberg, and they had to change the family name at the time of the First World War because of their German origins. And his father lost out in the Royal Navy. He reached the pinnacle. He was a admiral of the fleet, and he was the head of the Royal Navy, the first Sea Lord. And so Mountbatten actually, at the end of his career, not only became the first Sea Lord, he was also the Chief of Defense Staff. And so, with his royal connections, he was actually a blood relation, through Prince Philip. Well, I said it goes back to Queen Victoria anyway. He was actually a cousin of the late Queen Elizabeth II. He was made the target. But there are these questions which are bubbling to the surface because you're now having people of the establishment writing books, and people say not only did he have a gay homosexual part of angle to his lifestyle, but also pedophilia. And there are all these strange things about the British security forces not actually doing enough to protect him at the time he was on his holiday in Ireland. You wouldn't believe that there was actually an insurgency there at the time, a particularly violent insurgency. But yeah, that very important person.
So
Some people feel overrated. Yeah, go on.
so it's almost as if they let it happen because he had become a sort of a pariah. Nobody liked him.
Yeah, I mean, no, his public image. I mean, there were many reasons why you might not have liked him. For instance, in the Second World War, he was made the director of combined operations, so Navy, Army, Air Force. And before D-Day, they had this amphibious landing in Dieppe, mainly with Canadian troops. And there were other nationalities there, and it was an absolute disaster. When you're a military commander and you're at the head of an operation which a lot of lives are lost, that spells incompetence.
Mm,
And it's the
mm,
same thing with as a ship commander. People claim he ran a happy ship, but there's a lot of evidence that he wasn't always very competent about that. But from the public perspective, he was very tall, good looking, obviously well spoken, and he still had a hold over the British public at that time when he was assassinated in 1979.
mm.
But yeah, as you said it, the sort of let him or let it happen scenario. There's been a recent biography on him and his wife, Edwina Mountbatten, and yeah, that does crop up, even though apparently British forces did supposedly assassinate one or two people who were said to have been involved in it. There's still some question marks about it, and it may have had, particularly with his protection, which was actually lacking, which people suspect there were other reasons. Um,
So
and I think yes, the that that element of security forces being taken, being enabled or enabling nationalist organizations or so-called terrorist organizations or freedom fighter organizations, they can actually be controlled without them knowing about it. So there are a lot of files that are sealed up,
mm.
on Lord Mountbatten, and it may be a long time before they
Oh
actually
yeah.
reopen them or open them.
Mm, most
Mm.
definitely. You're talking about freedom fighters and forces being controlled without them knowing it. See, I have come to think that that's the story of Africa in around the 1960s, um, looking at the independence movements. It seems to me you're watching what's going on, and it seems to me that it's too neat. First, you get Ghana, they get independence, then almost like a domino effect, the rest follow. Nigeria gets it in 1960, I think, and it's all around the same time, particularly in West Africa. Now, my question is very quickly, Nkrumah starts talking about something called neo-colonialism. Um, is that really what the name of the game was? Were we being allowed independence so that we could, so that colonialism could go a different route, so that colonialism could just transform, could evolve? Or was it organic and Western powers just kind of had to regroup somehow. Do you- yeah, over to you.
I think your first the first point that you posited, or the first version, is absolutely correct. So let me right at the outset say yes, uh, before our discussion may move here and there, but hopefully we'll still be on point, and will be people in the audience, or your viewers will be following. In a nutshell, what you've said is yes. Actually, they say, if I read a book on British on intelligence. Just looking at British history in the 20th century, through the wars and the era of decolonization, just through the prism of intelligence. The internal security services, now known as MI5, the external MI6, special branch, military intelligence. Yeah, let me put it in a nutshell. The cover story is that after the end of the Second World War, um, I say it's a cover story, but there's a lot of truth there. It's a fact that Britain was basically bankrupt, you know, and they'd had to borrow money from the United States to subsist. Now, at this point, not just Britain, but the other colonial powers were poorly in a very, in a financial sense. And I think it's also very important for us to make a note of this. Even though we can look back, we say this is absolute rubbish. America, first started with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, for
Mm,
much of the war, until Harry Truman succeeded him after he died, just before the war concluded. He, taking on the mantle of we're America, we're the arbiters of free trade, republicanism, down with the monarchy, up with freedom. He specifically told the leaders of Britain, of France, and the other European leaders, your time is up. So you need to free your people. Okay, we are America. We had our revolution all that time. Now, there's a bit of underhandedness there, from the point of view of the Americans, in regard to their European partners, because America may have styled itself as a republic, but America began to become an empire, you
mhm,
know, probably started in the 19th century. But, because, that's when the Monroe Doctrine was declared. No European power has the right to infiltrate South America. It's our territory. But certainly the Spanish American War at the turn of the century, and then the First World War, although they retreat into isolationism, when its Second World War comes, America is a world power. It's a
mm,
hegemon, and also it's going to control the rest of the European powers. No question about that. It still maintained control of the Philippines. Puerto Rico was still a part of it. It had territory in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. This is before the revolution, against by Castro, which overthrew the dictator Fulgencio Batista. These people are all controlled by the Americans. They're an imperial power, and all they wanted to do really was to usurp the powers of the Europeans. But where possible, and I think we're going to talk a bit more about this later on, or as part of this question you've asked, because it's kind of a long question, because France maintained its neocolonial empire. So that's the first strand of my answer to your question. That although on the face of it, America said end of World War II, give your colonies, Francophone Africa and Francophone Asia, Anglophone Africa, Anglophone Asia, give them independence. We want free trade, we want free people around the world. The truth was, first of all, America wanted to be this global hegemon, a role that they were basically taking over from the British
mm,
Empire, now basically redundant and bankrupt. But also, America was conducive to them keeping their empires, or when they were given so called independence, keeping them allowing them to keep their former colonies as vassals. And I think at some point we will have to talk about France Afrique, France's shadow empire, the way France maintained this empire in Africa, despite the so-called giving of independence. So that is the second strand. That yet they may have been bankrupted by World War II, but they could then also dip into the resources of these colonies, um, and exploit them. And then when they did give them independence, because it's very difficult to manage a colony. I mean, you've got to put money into it. I know you could have, I don't want to grade who was the better colonist or whatever. It's all bad. But you probably are aware that there will be people who will say, oh, the Portuguese left absolutely nothing, no infrastructure. But at least the British, they educated the people who are going to be in the elites, which I know is a story about how they maybe have maintained their hold over the so-called ex-colonies. But it was actually cheaper for them to say, we're giving you independence. And I know we both come from same country, part of the Anglosphere, and we know about the Commonwealth of Nations, which was created. So the British have this habit, rebels within their own country. They know how to kind of co-opt them into the ruling class. Yeah. And in the same way, they're friends. The Mau Mau rebellion, that was a bloody, uncivil, terrible thing, full of atrocities. You think it was the black Mau Mau who were doing so much killing. It was actually the British who were murdering people and torturing people. Okay. And that's not an anti-Western statement. That's just a fact. Now, but Kenya, suddenly Jomo Kenyatta, the enemy, although he wasn't the leader of the Mau Mau, but he's a friend. So they're very good at that. But I think the best example of how these European nations maintain their power, remember, I'm saying that it's quite costly to run a colony, and actually giving them quote unquote self determination, you can actually exploit them in a better way and a more profitable way. I think France had that under their France Afrique um, policy. I don't know if you want to stop me at this point and I'll
No, no,
continue
no. Go
later.
go ahead. Go ahead. This is brilliant.
Well, you see, with France, first of all, after the end of the Second World War, if you remember, France was divided. The Vichy's, after the German Blitzkrieg, they took over northern France, but they gave a southern portion of French territory somewhat a bit of independence, but still they were a German protectorate under General Petain, which is known as, the country was called Vichy France. And so General de Gaulle, who escaped to London, he's fighting for France as he sees it. He doesn't want Germany to, invade his country and remain there. So he sought refuge in London. So you have this battle for the soul of France. And of course, with the tide of the war, de Gaulle came to power in France. But going back to my first point, France, like Britain, was very poorly economically, but they used their African colonies. So this is just before we go back to the neocolonialism. But immediately after the Second World War, France is devastated. There's been a lot of fighting. Normandy, when you invade with that famous amphibious landing, I mean, it was calculated. De Gaulle was told, look, you're going to lose up to 60,000 French men and women with our initial assault. So, and there was a lot of damage in France. So, what does France do? They've got their colonies. The Free French, these people in the Free French, these people we got to know as leaders, like Bokassa, the Mad Emperor,
Mm-hmm.
uh, some, I don't know about Nassimbe Eyedema of Togo, but some of them were on the younger side, but they would have fought for France in Indochina. And I know Bokassa did fight in Indochina as well. Look, so France is fighting all these wars. They're losing. They lost Indochina, of course, Vietnam, Cambodia, and that was continued by the Americans in the 1960s in the Vietnam War until it ended in 1975. But you see that in the immediate aftermath, they exploited Africa's resources to mend themselves. And when you're in that position of authority, you're thinking of yourself first, not the people you are exploiting in Cameroon, the French part of Cameroon, as it then, well, then when it was French, mainly they've got the English speaking part, which decided to stick with them. Congo, Congo Brazzaville at least. And so Ivory Coast, because most of West Africa is francophone. Actually, it's just these two
Yeah.
big entities of Ghana and Nigeria that stick out. But actually, most of the territory there was French speaking. And so, what they did in the build up to so-called independence was they created a French community. Okay, and in that French community, France was going to set the tone of what is politics, what is the status of militaries, and also obviously economics. And so a French currency was, or a so-called African currency under the auspices of France was created in West Africa and Central Africa among the old French colonies. And they deliberately made the franc, the West African franc, and they call it the CFA. One was in West Africa, the other one in Central Africa. They deliberately valued the currency of these countries when they were colonies and when they were, well, when they became supposedly independent. Starting with the people like the Guineans under Sekou Toure. Secretary is the one, I should say, that said, we don't want to join your community because we can see where it's heading to. You're going to exploit us. And,
Mm.
he made that famous statement with that Guineans will rather be as poor and free rather than being rich but be slaves. But everybody apart from Sekou went along with this. So the French, these currencies that were established for the African states were actually valued at around the same rate as the franc, the French franc. Well, this meant that the African nations had a lot of purchasing power. And so it just directed them to buy only from France. But it also meant that they really couldn't develop their countries because if you've got a strong currency, you can't export. It's going to be very difficult.
Mm.
So that is how they were trapped into, or major part of how they were trapped into being into this servitude under France after the so-called independence. And it's all the what has just transpired. I know at some point we're going to talk about what's happened in the Sahelian region, but it was so obvious at the time that France had a big hold over them, and so far from being just the French community, because it wasn't a partnership, it was actually France and a continuation empire, what you could call a shadow empire. They still had their grip on Africa. They had first choice when it came to these minerals, okay, before any other country could show their heads. Yeah, they had to go to France and explain, and ask, shall we Buy,
mm,
or shall we sell it to these people, or should you do you want first choice? This is how things were developed. French culture, the French language continue to be foisted on these people. And French troops remained on the Francophone soil for a long time, you know, and these troops were used for covert and overt operations. So, a good
mm,
example I can give you of them um, keeping their hold over countries is Cameroon. You know, France assassinated two opposition leaders. They believed in socialism, and they were certainly anti-colonialism, and they really wanted to break away from France. So one man, I think his name was Ruben Unyobi, he was killed by the French army. And then his successor, Felix Roland Mumi, he was murdered by the French external services, their foreign intelligence service in Geneva. You know, he was poisoned. So
wow.
assassinations, the control of culture, control of currency. I think I've chosen that, as I said in the at the beginning, even though I come from the English speaking part like you.
Mm.
I think the French setup just exposes the whole thing, and it was just similar all over,
So
francophone and anglophone.
so really,
Yeah,
Nkrumah, he's he's onto something. He knows, he realizes what's going on really early on. And for me, I think he was the one who coined the phrase neo-colonialism, because as you start to see what you're saying, it's obvious. It's plain as day that we're not really meant to be free. We're just um being given a sort of, we're being thrown a bone. So, for example, it's freedom on, on paper, but really not really freedom in actuality.
your vassals.
And
Yeah,
vassals, thank you. We're vassals, and this is the thing, Mr. Makide. This is the thing that I struggle to explain to some of my peers, and also some, not even some of my peers, but I can't even begin to explain it to the elders, because in our culture, the elders know everything, they know it all. So you can't explain to elders that you know it's not as simple as it seems, because when we, especially Nigerians, when and by extension West Africans, when we talk about our politics and the state of our countries, as it is, we tend to talk in a very parochial way, as though um all that's happened is all that's happening is what you can see on the ground, and you can't really get across to people that no, there are forces bigger and that are at play. um and so it's not like for like. You can't compare our attempts to um, industrialize, build infrastructure, rid ourselves of corruption. You can't compare it to the West, because the West is constantly interfering um, in the background. And I say, for me, when I start studying all of these different histories, the pattern is clear. You see a leader who rises and looks like is for the people, looks for like it's for clean government, clean governance, and um, before you know it, he's labeled a communist, or a sympathizer of this verboten group or whatever, and next thing you know, he's assassinated, or he's been forced out by a quote unquote popular coup. And I just don't know um how we overcome that, in Africa. How does Africa overcome this system of being manipulated from the outside, and how do we broadcast that? How do we make that known? Because I think the first step has to be knowing about this puppetry before we can get free of it. I feel like our American brothers across the pond, they are more woke to this than we tend to be in Africa. It just seems like a dead end. It seems like a dead end. You said something also about how 1 minute um somebody is a pariah, the next minute they're a friend. You know, you're talking about Kumo Kenyatta, I think, Jomo Kenyatta, and it's still the same thing. The same thing still happens today in the global south. And Orwell actually spoke about it. I remember reading. So chat. Let me engage you. If you've not read 1984 by George Orwell, I know is a white author. Um, Probably if you know anything about him, firmly entrenched in the upper like class, white elite class. Um, Although he did try to abandon that and extricate himself from that. But you have to read 1984 because 1984 gives a good, in my opinion, a good blueprint for how the world, not just the world works, but how politics across the global south, across Africa, works even till today. My guest was talking earlier about how one day they're a friend, one day a leader's a friend, and the next day is an enemy. Orwell wrote about this in 1984. He said the party decides constantly that there's constant changes of who is. One day we're at war with, I don't know, airstrip this, or I can't remember what the different groupings of the different nations were, and the next minute we're friends with them. He was writing this in I think the late 1940s, before all these African countries gained independence. Anyway, my question is, how do we break free of this cycle? Can we even break free of it?
Well, I mean, I'll give one suggestion, and this suggestion may be linked to what at some point I think we may cover this idea about Africa failing to industrialize and continuing to have these resource rental economies instead of being productive economies, which I think Nkrumah wanted to do. But, I think we have to criticize him while acknowledging the pressures that were on
Mm,
him, because that's very important. We mustn't just idolize people without
mm,
actually critiquing them. But my, I would go to the time before the Cuban Revolution. Or maybe I could just tell you a few of those covert actions very briefly that
oh, please
occurred in the
do.
1950s that
Please.
influenced Fidel Castro, what I'm going to say about Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Because, no, just very briefly, I wouldn't belabor or spend too much time on it. 1950s, well, actually, after the creation of the CIA, which was the successor, so CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, that was the successor organization to the OSS, which was the External Security Service of America up to the World War era. And they passed the National Security Act. And part of the idea about the CIA is it's not just a, a, a civilian intelligence gathering body, it also has a paramilitary aspect to it, by which American forces or the use of American proxies they can use force to overthrow governments, create chaos, that sort of thing. And so, very quickly, America, one of the CIA's first actions was to fix the elections in Italy because they were scared that the communists, remember the partisans, played a good role in liberating Italy from the yoke of Nazism. They were afraid they were going to win. They probably even won the election, but the Americans fixed the election. A bit like how the British fixed Nigeria's first elections. And they, in quick succession, they overthrew governments in Syria. Famously, in Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh was overthrown, 1953. The following year, um, Yaqub Arbenz, army colonel, but I think he turned out to be a civilian, he was overthrown in Guatemala. And so there is Castro and Che Guevara in exile in Mexico before they make their famous sailing on the Grama boat to Cuba, where they nestled themselves in the mountainous areas and they began the long process of um, defeating and overthrowing the dictator, the American-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. So they were musing one day and they said, "Look, if we ever come to power in Cuba, we can't be like Iran. We can't be like Guatemala. These Americans will have us for lunch because
Mhm.
their modus operandi is to infiltrate your country. Your country supposedly is free and democratic. Well, they'll come in there, they'll bribe military officers, they'll bribe members of the press, they will bribe religious leaders, they will, when they then get control of this or that part of the media, they will start broadcasting information which hurts you, the well-meaning leader. um, and so they could see that there was always this, and it continued in Chile when Salvador Allende was overthrown in 1973.
Mm.
If you run what I would call an open society, and I think Che and Fidel phrased it in this way: if you have an open society which is not regimented, which does not have an authoritarian angle to it, at least when you're trying to develop your economy, then you can loosen things up. But they basically said to themselves that there's no way Cuba could survive if it pretended or it went along with this whole idea about free society, free press,
Mm.
because these countries, with all their money, their connections, they will use it against you. And so the opposite of a open society would be a closed society. They said that, look, you need to have very, very good intelligence, local, that is domestic and foreign. You need to monitor these people, these potential colonists from North America or Western Europe, whichever country is interested in exploiting you. And so that is why they pursued the revolution after they overthrew Batista by, um, I know it's controversial. I believe in personal freedom and liberties. But when
Mm.
you're trying to
Mm.
build a nation from scratch, you may think it may be much better to
Mm.
have this authoritarian streak, which obviously must come from the consent or must be brought about by co-opting the people to certainly educate the people who are ruling the masses that, look, this is for your benefit. And that kind of closed society is one important area in which you may be able to withstand it. I can give you an example of where the society wasn't necessarily one that was run by a security state. But I have to say that, and we may discuss this further in detail when we get onto economics, Julius Nyerere did not perform well economically. He's an Ujama socialism, and we can go into the reasons why that happened later on. But one of them was following the advice of another apparatus of um, neocolonialism, the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, and the IMF. They will hook
Mm.
you in, they will indebt you, and they will control your economic destiny. And I can give the reasons later on why he realized it, but it was too late. He was already out of office when he was admitting this. But going back to our major point about preventing overthrows and intrigues from external forces, uh, Nyerere was good at maintaining power. Remember, he gave a home to every African liberation movement of note in Tanzania. That itself, could have was a technically a security risk. But more than that, he knew that because of his politics, the CIA would be interested in overthrowing him. And unlike other African countries where, they try to assert themselves, Tombalbaye in Chad is one example. But they just ended up being overthrown. Uh, Nyerere had the temerity to expel the notorious Larry Devlin of the CIA, and he got away with it. That is Nyerere. So, but as I said, it wasn't a balanced equation because economically, unfortunately, like virtually all the African states, they failed economically in terms of developing their countries. And that's something I hope we will discuss the reasons why, because some of it is the mentality that has been brought in by African leaders, even those who are not vassals like Mobutu. Yeah. Um, but I will just conclude this point by saying that, yeah, Nyerere expelled he knew the CIA wanted to overthrow him, and he expelled Larry Devlin and nipped what needed to be nipped in the bud. So he was good at preserving um, this sort of infiltration by a foreign service. Not very easy, not something that it's virtually unheard of in a lot of the other African countries. There's always been some sort of chink there, but
Mm,
Nyerere withstood pressures of the CIA because they did want to overthrow him. So, yeah, just to wrap up, open society, closed society. At the beginning of your independence, or the beginning of where you want to start creating institutions, Africanized but modern institutions, alongside a developing plan that makes you productive, produce your own raw materials, that you have abundance in your continent. Yeah, you you extract them and you manufacture them and then export them as world-class goods under one currency regime. That's what every African country should be aiming for. Unfortunately, I don't see anybody, including those, loud secessionists. They don't have a program that says,
mm.
let's do away with this rental resource, giving, just selling our raw materials. Because if I could, just before I finish up, you remember I was talking about France exploiting their soon to be quote unquote ex colonies, with the currency control, etc. And if you, as an African state, can just uh, develop yourselves from the point of view of maintaining control of your raw materials, selling them at a fair price, and then, well, not selling them. I'm saying you shouldn't sell. You should actually use them to manufacture products and then export them. Then you will no longer be an appendage of the world. I was going to latch onto something, but sorry, it's just slipped my mind. This thing, it will probably come up
That's
to
fine.
me, but it's something
That's fine.
I'll bring
When
up later. But
it
over
will
to you.
come
Yeah.
back. It will come back. But see, the
Mhm.
thing is, I used to be against this idea of um, not Pan Africanism, but this unified economic model for Africa, because I thought my fear was, and it still is, but to a lesser extent now, that you unify something and it's easier to co-opt. You centralize and unify us, and we're easier to then co-opt. How would the leadership structure work? Um, if that leadership structure is co-opted, then the whole continent's done. Um, but now I'm thinking it's inevitable if we're actually gonna do anything because, like you said, yeah, Africa does need it does need some form of um what how would you say it, a united economic front, where we can, you know, in solidarity, place embargoes, um, uh, militarily, we can, pool our resources. It seems
What you're
like,
saying there is what Nkrumah wanted. He wanted an African high command, and he also wanted Africa to integrate the economies as quickly as they could. So that is where I'm sure you've must have mentioned this in your videos that may have covered it. You know, the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group, and they kind of found a compromise, and that's where the OAU, Organization of African Unity, was created. But yeah, what you're saying is precisely what Nkrumah said. Join forces together. Most individual African countries have a lot of raw materials and critical
mm,
minerals that they could make very good use of. Because I think a first point of, but let me stop there. Sorry, because I did interrupted you. But that's going back to that Monrovia group. Those are the people who wanted to integrate slowly. But Nkrumah and people like Gamal Abdel Nasser, they were more for African unity, and those were the Casablanca group.
right. I saw a meme recently and it was so sad.
So
It was
sad it
uplifting,
was.
but it was uplifting and sad at the same time. So you had someone talking about different, for example, coffee. Coffee is seen as an Italian thing. You see Italian branded coffee, Italian made, uh chocolates, for example, Belgian chocolates, all these different things. And the what's the word, the corollary, the punchline of the meme was, um none of these countries actually produce these things. All of the countries that all these countries that are famous for these things, actually, the materials and all of these things come from Africa. They actually, tea is another thing that was in the meme. They're they're African.
Chocolate.
They're African. And it was so sad. It was so sad to see that. So, you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, this idea that, yeah, and in the climate in the UK right now is rife with it. This idea that Africa or Africans produce nothing, give nothing to the world, whereas actually the world is built on our backs. The modern world, let not to talk to say nothing about the world in the past. Just talk about today. Is built on our backs. So this idea of, I remember my first time reading The White Man's Burden by Kipling. It was it was hilarious to read, when really that the more you read about history, the more actually it's a cruel irony that actually the truth of it is the other way around. It's built on the backs of these people. So, okay, where am I going with that? Maybe I'm not going anywhere with that. I just wanted a little rant.
No,
Do you have
actually,
you
you've just latched onto the point that I was thinking of rounding up, but it slipped my mind because you remember what I was talking about when France created this free French zone
mm,
currency in their former colonies,
mm,
and these colonies had helped build France up after France was devastated by World War II. Well, the interesting thing is, I said that they overvalued the currencies of the French colonies or the so-called independent French countries. Well, that meant that they had to buy French goods, okay, but they could not export. But the interesting thing is that the goods, Cameroon, Congo Brazzaville, Senegal, all of them, they were buying products that were made from the raw materials that they sold to France. That France had a first choice for. So yeah, it's very tied. The thing about African development is very tied up into this issue of your resources. Think about it. If Africa could just exploit its own resources, manufacture products for domestic and sub-regional consumption, and also produce world-class goods, wow, under one currency regime, you know, South Korea, a miracle of an economy, they're not minerally rich. So this is where Africans are losing out disadvantageously. Now, is it because of bribed people? Is it a shortcoming of the African mentality? Is it because of European intervention? I think all of the above there, because the evidence is there. Who do you know? I'll put it to you, and maybe you can invite people in the chat. Since, for instance, in Nkrumah, and there's a flaw we can talk about later on about his program of industrialization. But which African nation has had a program to industrialize their society in the way the Soviet Union did, in the way South Korea did under Park Chung-hee, and even Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore? People often mention the miracle of Singapore, and they come up with the most absolute rubbish. People in Ghana, in Nigeria, was like, oh, if Kofi Busia wasn't overthrown, or if this Babangida hadn't done this, we would be like Singapore today. Come on, you have to put in some hard work.
Mm.
And the way I just want to put it, linking to what I said about Fidel, closed society, open society, Fidel and Che Guevara, um, you need a streak of authoritarianism in the early bit of your nationhood, because all those countries I mentioned, Europe built themselves up, yeah, over the centuries through
Mm.
exploiting the cheap mineral resources of their colonies. We don't want to get all bitter and remind ourselves about the disgusting, barbaric way in which Africans were treated in the Congo, when the Congo was that king's personal fiefdom. I mean, they used that to build themselves up. Now, my point is that those examples I just gave you, Soviet Union, Singapore, to kind of a lesser extent, but Lee Kuan Yew was a bit of a dictator, despite the trappings of democracy and charismatic leadership. And South Korea, all of these non-white nations, I was going to say non-Western nations, but non-white nations, whichever one you want to pick, they develop their countries under a regimented society. So all this stuff about democracy, I'm a very individualistic person. So I'm not going to take kindly to tyranny in any sphere of my life, but building up your country, let's show us an example where democracy, okay, in Africa has enabled a country to rise up, industrialize itself, and compete with their former colonial masters.
I agree with
Yeah.
that. I agree with that, and again, that's one of the things I would never have thought I would agree with 10, 15 years ago. Because you're fed the whole thing about democracy is this um sacrosanct, ideology. But you mentioned Europe just now. Europe had hundreds of years of monarchs, religious dictatorships, but some barbaric rulers before they came to the stage of, oh, and even now, there's a good argument for saying that the so-called democracy is itself is a marionette show. You know, it's a puppet show, really. But and that corporations run the thing. But
Absolutely. I
let's
mean, if I
just
could
say,
just say, just very briefly, America and its duopoly, you know, you, it's like that rock song by The Who, say
Mhm.
goodbye to the old boss,
Yeah, yeah,
new same boss, that sort of thing. People know that it doesn't matter whether they vote Democrat or Republican, you're still going to have the same old SH1T or show, rather, show. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so it's kind of freeing ourselves. Listen to what you're saying. It's freeing ourselves from how things what how we've been told things are supposed to go. Can I just play? People might not know who you're talking about when you say Lee Kuan Yew. Do you know what? I only discovered him today myself. I'm not gonna pretend. I'm not gonna pretend that I'm some historian as well. But let me just present this and show. This is, guys, go on my guest's channel, Adeyinka Makinde. He doesn't need it because he's got like 3 4 times my subscribe count. But if you don't know about his channel, you need to go there and just subscribe, because you're gonna get clips like this from time to time. They're gems. Lee Kuan Yew was a Singaporean prime minister, and let me just show you what he was saying about the meddlesome s- how bad this CIA problem is. And then I'll make a point afterwards, and then and I'll ask a question based on that point. But here we go. This is what Lee Kuan Yew is saying. This is on my guest's channel. Um yeah, here you go. I want to be quite frank with you here. If the British withdraw, I'm prepared to go on with the Australians and the New Zealanders, but I'm not. Just so you know, this is titled Lee Kuan Yew interview reveals the American CIA tried to bribe a Singaporean official, August 1965. Prepared to go on with the Americans. What? Why not, Mr. Prime Minister? Why do you think the Americans? Well, can I put it this way? I think there are highly intelligent, well-meaning often people, and some of their leaders, like Kennedy, the late president, had signs of growing greatness, depth. But, by and large, the administration lacks depth and judgment or wisdom, which comes out of an accumulation of knowledge of human beings and human situations over a long period of time. That's lacking. And it's not, therefore, what have they got? 300-400 years of history, and they've become a nation just recently. I'll tell you this. I've had only three experiences with the Americans. And they did not intend any harm in each one of them. He's being really diplomatic there, guys. I just have to I have to interrupt chat. He's been really diplomatic there. And he was in power for a long time, so you can see why now. Because you have to play your cards kind of, wisely sometimes. So that's all I'll say about that statement he just made there. But the tragedy was they did real harm. First, this is old stuff now. We caught an American CIA agent trying to subvert our intelligence special branch officer. Bribe him so that the special branch officer will feed the CIA, because the CIA wants to know what's happening. I mean, subverting a Singapore officer. The man might have succeeded, but I'm proud to say that the officer offered large sum of money and continuing sums of money. This was in 1960. Refused and reported the matter to his chief, who reported it to me.
Man was caught, locked up, and it was on razor's edge whether we charged him in open court or not. No, no, let me explain this. When I told the American government, all right, we keep quiet, you take this man away, $100 million to the Singapore government for economic development. You know? No, 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 listen to me. I didn't tell, I never spoke to the Americans direct because, they are, they lack the finesse and, they may say, yes, they give it to you. Why not? Why should the Singapore government just give to you, to me, which would have ruined me? But through an intermediary, they offered me and my party $10 million. I mean, the insult. I told them, keep it.
There's a lot of shifting bottoms in that studio right there. He's not he's not making them comfortable at all. But I play that clip because, guys, this is what they're doing. This is what we're up against. So um I actually think, considering that um this is what we've been up against for the longest, I actually think you could take an optimistic view, Mr. Makinde, my guest, and I think actually Africa's doing quite well. Africa's doing quite well. I believe the reason why it's been so hard on us is because we are sitting on we are the most resource rich bit of planet Earth. We are Africans sit on the most resource rich, and I want to be a bit nativist and say, in the past, our empires have been, or our kingdoms, so to speak, have been right next door to the European landmass, and we've we've had a good time of it in the past. That's what this channel is about. This channel is about um rehashing and uncovering the bits of black history that aren't spoken about, that that are not that are separate from trauma, and I think the European learned a long time ago that I don't want that again. We don't want that again. So I think that's part of really why it's more intense on Africa and black spaces than it is with, say, the example my guest gave, South Korea earlier. That's that's the one pushback I would say. I would say that we are going to face twice, maybe thrice, the opposition that some of these places face because of those reasons. I don't know what you've got to say about that, Mr. Makide.
No, it's a good point because somebody mentioned it to me some time ago, and I was talking about how the West, one of the bad moves the West has made, which is leading to its inexorable decline, not immigration by migrants, but a whole range of things, is their own voluntary disindustrialization and moving their industrial base, where to parts of Asia. And this person mentioned, well, they probably is a reason they didn't sort of um, put their bases in Africa, because where Africa has all the resources, it would be easy, or well, I say easy, they you look at the way Trump uses force. I mean, it's not a new thing. He's just being crude about it.
Mm,
This has been the lot of Africa and Asia since the end of the Second World War. But they wouldn't be too keen on, once they industrialize themselves, because they wanted cheap products, from cheap labor. They deliberately didn't export. When I say export, they didn't sort of use Africa as the base of the manufacturing, because at some point the Africans would be able to co-opt um, that. If they're seeing, oh, they're digging these materials up, oh, they're manufacturing it not too far from, still in our country, people will then get the idea, which still isn't clicking with a lot of African leaders. Take control of your resources and manufacture them. But that might have been one reason for not um, sending goods to be made in Africa, where the materials, the raw materials, are already there. So yeah, yeah.
Miss, Mr. Akide, have you heard of something called Operation Legacy?
Operation Legacy in
Mm.
regard to what?
The
Is it what the
British,
CIA, MI6?
yes, the British Empire's last days in Africa. It's something that someone put me onto. So what's my friend King's Monologue? I was talking to him a
Hmm.
long time ago now. He runs a channel here on YouTube as well. Check him out if you get the time. And he was telling me about Operation Legacy, and he said, "Do I know? Tro? Do you know that like there's an operation called Operation Legacy where the British burnt files and records of things they took, things they stole out of Africa, atrocities that they committed." I said no, I never heard about it, and in fact, it sounded like a conspiracy theory to me. And then I looked into it. It's not conspiracy theory. It's mainstream. People know about it. It's a thing. Have you ever heard of it yourself?
Not particularly from the point of view of the British. I mean, one of the things was that I mentioned about President Roosevelt sort of telling the British, French, and other European powers to quote unquote decolonize their states. And actually, the British didn't really have a plan about decolonization. That was something in which they just that it dawned on them they had to do. And as I mentioned, it was something that would be cheaper to actually be a neo-colonial power, have a stooge in there running things for you, but you could exploit your ex-colonies even more efficiently. But I'll go and recheck that. I mean, there's a book by somebody called Calder Walton about intelligence and the history of intelligence with the British Empire. So I'll recheck if he actually covers
Mention.
that. A lot of it is, it's sort of focuses a lot on World War, but there's a lot on Ghana and even more. I'm sorry, less, but less about Nigeria. About how things like Special Branch, MI5, MI6 were on the African continent. And even, I think you might have mentioned this. I watched one of your videos that you sent me, how I don't know if you mentioned Special Branch, but a lot of these institutions were there manned by expatriate Europeans,
Mm,
well into independence, but yeah,
mm.
Operation Legacy.
Yeah,
I'll check that out.
yeah, they obviously
Mm.
did a good job. When well versed people like yourself might not have heard about it, but it's an interesting chapter in the
Has a
history.
book been
Um,
written about it, or is
I'm
there?
sure that I'm sure there would have been. I don't know of a
Mm.
particular book about it, but there is a Wikipedia entry on it
Oh, okay.
as though it's common knowledge. But I just learnt about it recently myself.
Mm.
I wonder who
Mm.
whistle blew on it or how it became public knowledge. But
People
anyway,
stumble on these things sometimes by accident.
yeah,
And
yeah,
another ploy by a researcher is that even if you may feel, oh God, you've got these large embargoes on accessing information on the security services, particularly when they put 50 years, 100 years. But sometimes you can find about these things indirectly because these
mm,
security services, you remember Britain didn't recognize, they didn't recognize, although everybody knew there was an MI5, MI6, there was no statutory footing, you know.
mm,
And I
mm,
think, but you could still get indirect information from the government departments that service them. you know, and
Yeah.
something you just
Yeah.
stumble on it.
So,
That's what happened,
um,
with the Kenyan situation. Sorry, the Mau Mau rebellion and uh, descendants of Mau Mau did sue the British government, for
mm.
and some of them are still alive. The torture and stuff like that. There was a lot of information was found indirectly in that way.
And you know what's funny about that? Um, the Mau Mau uprising and all of that chapter of history, that was Operation Legacy was heavily involved in that. Operation Legacy,
Mm,
yeah,
you're
they
right.
that was a key part of Operation Legacy. They really wanted to bury the atrocities that took
Yeah.
place during the Mau Mau uprising there. So yeah, check that out. Okay, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. I didn't even know anything was going on till like last year. We had already had overthrows, and it was like 2 years later that I'm finding out who Asimi Goiter is, and Chiani, and
Traore.
our sorry,
Traore.
and Traore. Thank you. Is, and for me that goes to show how hard, how uneasy that event in that part of the world is making the powers that be. What's your take on what's going on there? Is it something that is positive, is good for Africa, or are you suspicious?
No, I think it is a good thing because for a lot of Francophone Africa, I just told you about how your audience as well about how um, France had their ex-colonies in their grip, through their shadow empire, which is really what this French community was. And, France had this shadow empire in which they could just exploit, they could get the most favorable deals. They would buy uranium pennies, for pennies from Niger. And so there's a whole welter of contracts and arrangements that just needed to be sorted out. And when you have countries' militaries on your soil, I mean that's a threat to your own democracy.
Hmm.
I mean, the hypocrisy of it all. That's something that General de Gaulle, when he was President de Gaulle, understood. Because de Gaulle kicked NATO out of Paris. NATO was previously headquartered in Paris, and then de Gaulle kicked them out in 1968 because he knew the Americans with what you've been talking about, the CIA and their military intelligence, and there's something called Operation Gladio, a very sinister operation that occurred during the Cold War years. It's a threat to your sovereignty. So by Mali and Niger kicking the French out, and also American troops were present. I think that's a good thing. Now, whether they are making the best of it is another matter. I know there are
Hmm.
people who criticize Captain Traore. They say he's more about show and performative stuff rather
Hmm.
than doing something, particularly as they're losing out with the jihadists in the Sahelian region. And there's a reason for that. Let's not be, and the French, that was one of the reasons why they kicked the French out, because their anti jihadist insurgency was a total failure. And there's evidence that the French and the Ukrainians and the West are sponsoring these jihadists. Just like that's their modus operandi. They have either supported jihadists or fascists, the West has, as a proxy to pressure people. So recently, Syria, you had Al Qaeda there. The West was in charge. They are in
Hmm.
controlling the man. They've got their man from the man who inherited the vacuum caused by Assad's fall. He calls himself Al Jolani. He's Al Qaeda. He's now the so-called president of Syria. So are they making the best out of it? People talk about China and a debt trap. There've been a lot of well, a number of very serious Western academics who said that the so-called debt trap by China is a myth. Okay, but so I think it's a good thing, but it's how you go about it. And my thinking is, well, once you've got them out, you need to then make an arrangement about how you are going to industrialize your society. And that is the question there. That is the main thing that I mentioned earlier on before. You have to take control of your resources. Don't maintain this resource rental economy whereby all you do is you sell your raw materials and then you buy the finished goods. Yeah. You take control of it and you become a world competitor. That is my only query. Are
Mm,
these military boys, are they actually following that kind of agenda? I think you can deal with the Chinese if you're smart enough not to be exploited. I say
mm,
don't trust anybody. And also, the when it comes to the Russians, people misunderstand the Russians, because of the Cold War and all of that, the history, bloody history, as if the West itself doesn't have a bloody history. Russia is minerally, natural resource rich. So it doesn't need to sort of come to Africa to exploit Africa for its minerals. It's rich enough, but obviously it feels it needs to extend its range of influence. If
mm,
these people in the AES can uh, get down to a planned economy that is going to industrialize their society and educate their society to a level just above literacy. Actually plan ahead as to what industries you're going to create and educate people in advance. As long as they can do that on the economic side, and then as long as they can manage things on the military side, then they're on the right track. But I think one big impediment they have, and I wouldn't say it's their fault or the fault of the Russians for not training them well and for them not taking things into their own hands in Burkina Faso and Niger, is the sheer pressure of the jihadist insurgencies. People are funding these jihadists and they don't have the interest of Africa at heart. We know the security situation in Nigeria, so you can't just look at Mali and say, "Oh, they almost took Bamako and they assassinated a high-ranking military official, part of the government there," and say, "Oh well, laugh at them and say, well, you got rid of France, but what are the Wagner Africa Corps they're called now? What are they doing? Is it any better?" Well, there's a lot of evidence that you've got Ukraine, you've got other people involved in Mali and Niger, and you can
and
see
I
it in the
think
Lake Chad basin as well.
and I
Yeah,
think that is bleeding into. I don't want to say too much about this because um we don't know who's watching or who's listening, but I think a lot of it is being allowed to bleed into Nigeria. I think that's where a lot of these so-called bandits are getting their weapons from, and I think that there's a crossover there in terms of what's happening in Nigeria. Um,
you've got
and
a question there, but one other thing, sorry, but an important point, because there's also a question there about are they really jihadists? But if you remember, the West, NATO, destroyed Libya and overthrew Colonel Gaddafi.
Mhm,
And that is one aspect of the problem of jihadist insurgency in first of all, the Maghreb area, and then the Lake Chad basin, because the armories of the fallen army of Libya, those weapons found their way through the Maghreb area down to the South Lake Chad basin, where you have Boko Haram and the Islamic State in West Africa province. Oh yes, just to quickly answer that question, which you can also add to, is, there are jihadists who are attacking these Sahelian governments, these anti-French, anti-colonial governments that have taken power. No question about it. And they're being backed by external forces.
Thank you. And that's the point. It's funny how these jihadists and these um, Muslim extremists often turn up at the exact places where the West have interests. I'm just gonna put that out there. It's just it's very funny how
Absolutely.
that tends to happen.
Look, just a very
Um,
quick one. Look, there's an interview I did very extensively on. I've written extensively about this. The West has had a long history of sponsoring extremists, religious extremists, as well as political extremists in the sense of like Nazis, neo fascists. We can go back to Wilhelminian Germany, from the early 20th century, Britain, and its relations with the Muslim Brotherhood and using them to try to overthrow Gamal Abdel Nasser in the 1950s. We go to Afghanistan, the creation of the Mujahideen by the CIA, the external Mujahideen, which Osama bin Laden was a part of, and then the internal Mujahideen, the native Mujahideen. And you move on to places like Libya, where you had America helping Al Qaeda, yeah, overthrow Colonel Gaddafi, and also Syria. So you're absolutely spot on there. Anytime you have a situation where American interests are involved, for instance, to disrupt, to destroy, you will have extremists. And incidentally, China is, busy building all this infrastructure for the Belt and Road Initiative. A number
mm,
of the pipes China has that run through Central Asia. I think the one, particular one that's come on the radar is the one in Burma, now Myanmar. Why is it that project always being attacked by Muslim extremists? Very, very suspicious.
very suspicious. We'll say no. We'll say no more about that. But people know what we're
Mm,
driving at. Let me play you a clip, chat, and I want to get your thoughts on this because Um, I think we're gonna have to have you back if you don't mind because I've enjoyed this and I've not even touched really your background and I really wanted to understand more your background because your background is almost as interesting, if not more interesting than all this stuff that we've talked about and your father's background. And I just want um I would have just have liked to get more stories about that aspect of your life. But okay, if you oblige, we can have you back at some point. I'd be very very
sure.
um I'll be very very pleased and grateful for that. But let me just play this clip and then I'll get your thoughts on it. I want to preface this clip by saying if people I think part of the solution for us as black folk and in the diaspora and black people at home on the continent is, as Orwell put it, he didn't say these words exactly, but I'm paraphrasing very, very liberally. But you can see this theme in his work in Animal Farm and in you can see it in 1984 to actually get freedom from the reservation, you actually have to know you're on a reservation. You have to first realize you're on a reservation. And a lot of us, we don't realize we're on a reservation. We don't realize we're on a reservation. Part of our problem, especially in the African continent, like I was saying, is a lot of my friends, they don't realize that I understand that they're bothered about what we as Africans can do for ourselves rather than blaming others. I understand that perspective too, but it's woefully inadequate to stop there. You That's one third of the equation. Um, but fine, let's be liberal. It says half. The other half is external influence, and you can't begin to cure yourself by putting your head in the sand and saying, "Oh, it's just all our fault. We can't get it right." But every time we get out of that continent, guys, give ourselves credit. We we make some headway. We make some headway. So what is it? It can't be us because we're dominating. Once we leave Africa, we dominate sports, we dominate entertainment, we dominate academia. Um, so what's going on? What's going on? Anyway, I want to play this clip and I want people to understand as I play this clip that what we've been talking about tonight is not history. It's actually happening right now, and more brazenly, more openly, more conspicuously is about to start happening all over again. We spoke about Trump. My guest spoke about Trump earlier, and he said nothing new under the sun. It's just that Trump is doing it more brazenly than ever before than we've had in recent times. But that same Trumpism is actually, we're seeing it spread far and wide now. Take a look at this, guys. Take a look at this clip I'm about to play you. Um, Let me share my screen. Here we go. Just for people who think, um, yeah, have a look at this.
But what Britain did in Nigeria, let me educate you, you're ignorant of this, was to see that it was easy to control the people in the north by climbing on the back, by piggybacking on the oligarchy, the oligarchical system, the feudal system in Nigeria. The Igbos were like, at some point, no, our life was terrible by your oppressive regime and rulership. We need to be free. And that was the crime. When the Igbos and the Yorubas joined forces to say that we needed independence, what did Britain do when they finally agreed to let go? They made those Northerners who rejected English education, English religion, English way of life, the overlord over these two who were civilized and educated, because it was easy to control the whole of Nigeria using the Islamic feudal system. And that is why we have the genocide, the massacre of Christians ongoing now in Nigeria. And what has Britain said about it?
Would you like us to come and colonize you again and sort it out?
To come and colonize us again, sort it out.
Yeah, should we go over and colonize you and stop the horrific slaughter of Christians?
So you can hear that, chat. You can hear the salient points this man this man has just made, right? And you would think maybe you'd get some kind of sensible response, some kind of sensible conversation, dialogue. Listen to what this guy said. He said, "Should is the solution that we should come back and colonize you?" It gets better. Listen to this.
No, but that's what you have created.
Yeah, so should we sort it out?
When you talk about the benefit of the British Empire, it did as good as much as it did evil as well. And it's quite rich for you to sit there thinking you can patronize someone as me that is more intelligent than you are.
Were these massacres happening when we were running your country?
I'm more intelligent and more educated than you, arrogant twat that is out there talking rubbish. You want to come and colonize Nigeria?
Wait. Were these massacres happening?
If you are allowed, can you?
Were these massacres happening
As
under
dumb
us?
as stupid as you
Or
are,
did they happen when we left you to run your own country?
That's very stupid thing.
Were they happening
I thought I was going to have a civilized
when
conversation.
we were running your country?
Maybe I listened to you.
Were these massacres
You want to
happening?
come back and colonize Nigeria?
Were these
What a damn stupid
Were
question.
these
Very
massacres
unintelligible
happening
question.
under us?
So what Britain
I just wanted to um to play that for us to see that this isn't history. People are actually openly speaking again. Um Young folk, that guy looks like about my age. No, I'm flattering myself. He looks much younger than me. Talking now about recolonizing Africa. Um Sorry, I've spoken on too long. Mr. Makinde, what do you make of that? What you just saw?
Well, I mean, look, it's I don't know what format that is. I saw a clip recently, maybe two of them, which were somebody going around and talking as if he was, that man in America from You know, I don't know if
Yeah,
that was
yeah, yeah.
modeled, that exchange was modeled on that. This is, I mean, first of all, the so-called white nationalist movement or white identitarian movement. I mean, he must have been talking cynically because their argument would be, "Oh, we don't want you anymore in our countries. We want migration," and they will always protest and say, "Well, we're not white supremacists, so you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone." So I think he was just trying to egg on the other guy there. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know, for instance, about it's not totally about Christians being attacked. In fact, most of the people who've been murdered by
Mm,
Boko Haram, Islamic State in West Africa province, kidnapped and raped, taken in as wives, that sort of thing, forcibly. They're Muslims, you know that puts a lie to that, not to disregard it, but a lot of these so-called white nationalists and identitarians, the Trump MAGA, which is really now dead, really, for various reasons. um, they their mentality, they spread this thing about Christians being massacred, but they don't care a damn about black Christians because their creed, identitarian creed, is anti-black anyway. It's just a performative thing, and in many ways
mm,
they're not Christians. They are correct in sort of saying, well, Western Europe developed, when Christianity was stronger in the population, blah, blah, blah. But most of these they're like pagans. They are people who don't go to church. They're
mm,
materialists, you
mm,
know. So I can't take that seriously. And I think that
mm,
was just an offhanded comment. I think a more serious thing about the intentions of Western governments and recolonization would be 2 years ago when a ex chief of defense staff of France, his name is Francois Lecontre. He's now retired. He was featured in an interview of Le Figaro on YouTube, and he's the one who suggested in relation to Sahelian Africa, where these military regimes have thrown out the
yeah,
French. He's the one who
yeah.
said, "No, we've got to go back to Africa. We've got to recolonize it." Now, now we're talking something. That is somebody who's part of their establishment. On this
Mm,
occasion, France. And when Donald Trump releases his document, they call it the Monroe Doctrine. Remember, I'd mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, which is spheres of influence American drew in the 19th century about European powers should not try and interfere in Latin America. It's their fiefdom. Well, that's materialized, and that's why you're seeing Venezuela being effectively colonized. And Donald Trump is boasting about it, that I take Venezuelan oil. And they seem to have capitulated very easily there. So America controls Venezuela's money, just as they control the money of Iraq. So, they didn't totally leave Iraq. They still control American oil. And I think I recently heard them say that, and that's because they also disperse money to the public sector of Iraq. So for some reason, they haven't people in Iraq, civil servants, haven't been paid for 2 months. So that idea about recolonization is in the background because of the rise of China, the increase of Chinese influence in Africa. And I think that's what General Lecontre said in 2024 is more relevant than some small boy, if I could be a bit, West African, as a small boy, he doesn't know anything, but he's just trying to arrogate himself. We ruled you once. Do you want us to come and rule again? No, thank you, you silly twat. But I think, yeah, that is definitely on the agenda in the sense that Europe is not resource rich. And if you have a situation where Europe cannot gain access to raw materials, much of which is on the African continent, Europe will die a slow death. And you can have your all white Europe. There may be problems with immigration for sure. There's a Marxist critique about that, getting immigrants out of cheap labor, and all those,
Mm,
certainly the bombs you drop in far-flung places like Libya, Afghanistan. You don't just recover from that. People start migrating, and they don't always stop. Most of them do stop countries near the borders, but they make their way to Europe. But the
mm,
irony is Europe is in decline. Whatever the pride they show about, oh, the immigrants are bringing violence and blah, blah, blah. And it would be such a beautiful, wonderful place if we could just remigrate them and expel them. No, the issue about raw materials, very, very important. Because if Europe is deprived of it, if the people in their dream, in their what I say dreams, it could be reality, the likes of Douglas Murray, and there's another ex-military man. He's a vassal of the state of Israel. Was saying that, oh, the British working class will sort things if the politicians wouldn't. If you have pogroms in Europe, well, presumably there would have to be a population transfer. People will have to go back to Africa, Asia, and the British and the Europeans can keep their land, but they're not going to touch those resources anymore.
mm,
So do you see there is a dilemma? And if I could just mention this, so somebody I've learned a lot from him who contributes discussion-wise in the occasionally have in my community page on YouTube. And he was talking to a white fascist, a man who identified himself as a fascist. He said he admired some of these Arab dictators, but he just felt that the biosphere of the biological aspects of race and country meant that he was for white identity. And so this fellow at my YouTube channel made this point about white chauvinism and white supremacy. At one time, both of them were together. They're separate things. And the way he explained it is that before the end of, or after the end of the Second World War, these European powers no longer talked in terms of racial supremacy. And chauvinism kind of died out. Basically, what chauvinism is you feel you're the master race, you're superior. You want clubs, you want the law to put you ahead. Officially, the law should earmark you as being above other races, and you look down on other races. You don't allow them to join your clubs, that sort of thing. That's chauvinism, white chauvinism. The alternative, sorry, the opposite, or not the opposite, but the other thing, white supremacy is about actually maintaining control over the non-white people. And what I was talking to you about France Afrique and the way neocolonialism works is a form of white supremacy. They may criticize their leaders for allowing non-white immigrants into their countries and blah, blah, blah. And it's not that their leaders are self-hating or anti-white, but this is the best way they can secure access to African resources. So it doesn't do them well to talk about white, to be chauvinistic in their attitudes. But if we go down that road, then that's it. You will not have access to African resources. Africa will only deal with China, Russia, and presumably if you want to attack Africa because you're starving, because you want your own white ethno state again, China, Russia will back the Africans up. Well, I hope the Africans are smart to develop their military industries alongside industrialization. So you see, those two are mutually are separate concepts: white chauvinism, white supremacy. The World Bank, the IMF, neocolonialism like France Afrique, these are manifestations of white supremacy. They keep you indebted. They keep your leaders on side. They keep them strictly in line. Chauvinism, which is we are superior, etc., that doesn't play well in the world. Otherwise, you're going to starve yourself of resources. And I'll just round it up by just mentioning, General Lecointre. What he meant, when he was saying we need to, he actually he implied that France and other Western countries needed to go to Africa and recolonize. That white supremacy wanting to reassert itself. Remember, we're saying white supremacy doesn't make it obvious, but they
Mm.
ensure that it subsists because of the global economy, the control of your political leaders, etc., without going on about we are better than you, white chauvinism. And so that brought up the issue of Euro Africa, much of which was I was impliedly talking about when I was talking about France Afrique, because Euro Africa, EUR, followed by Africa, that is a concept that was invented in the 20th century. What Euro Africa means is that Europe's destiny, the believers of Euro Africa, they believe Europe's destiny is entwined with Africa. But it's not about partnership, it's about exploitation of
Mm-hmm.
minerals. And so, do you know that Euro Africa, the concept, do you know that that was what was behind the formation of the European community, later the EU?
Wow. Wow.
That is where Euro-Africa. So this man, Richard Kodegar, Kalegi, because I'm sure you've heard the Kalegi plan, which
Mm-hmm.
racists and
Mm-hmm.
supremacists talk about. That the plan of the EU is to make Europe a quote unquote Negroid Mongoloid race, mixture of blacks and whites, so they look like the old Egyptians, the lightest hued Egyptians. That's where Europe is heading to. That's a load of rubbish, because you know what? Kalegi, he was at the heart of Eurafrica and calling for a pan-European union that would exploit Africa. Yeah, he was mixed race. He was white and Japanese heritage. Yeah,
Mm.
he wrote about that thing about the admixture of races. He wrote that later on in his life. And when he did it, it was nothing to do with Euro-Africa. Euro-Africa is the basis of the European Union. I know that you and me, at some point, whether it's in school or when we're reading about the birth of the EU, we're thinking, Jean Monnet and what's the other chap's name? Schumann, Robert Schumann. After Second World War, let Europe join together, share their mineral resources, so you don't have the rivalry between Germany and France, and that effectively makes war impossible. The war that was going on from the Franco-Prussian War. Then France and Germany again. They were the protagonists at the beginning of what the Great War, which became known as the First World War. So that's the cover story, that the EU is there as a peace project.
Mm-hmm.
But no, your Africa, that is the basis. And you can see it being practiced by the EU. Your audience should read up about the Lome Convention. It was the Yaoundé Convention, 1960s, 1962, 1969. And there was the Lome Convention. One of them was 1975, in which you kind of Europe says you can be an associate state, and but sell us your raw materials. Yeah, give us first choice for your raw materials. We'll make you associate states. We'll try and help you with aid. Yeah, that word aid. Yeah, not development. And so that mentality has continued to this day. I'll round up by just saying that, look, Africa, yes, was the basis of the EU, not some Kalegi plan. It's about exploiting it. How do I know that? What consolidates that? Read up about Oswald Mosley, the British fascist, yeah, who led the Black Shirts, British Union of Fascists, before he was
Mm-hmm.
incarcerated, when World
Yeah.
War II came, because of his relationships with Hitler and Mussolini. When he came
So
out, he was
far,
still a racist. He was
Yeah,
still a
the pa-
racist.
the
And
the
he,
patriarch of the Mosley family, the Formula One family here. The
yes, Max
yeah,
Mosley, and
yeah,
that's his father, the late Max Mosley, Formula One, that's his father, yeah,
yeah.
from his second marriage
Mm,
to one of the Mitford sisters. So you see that he, Mosley, actually proposed his version of Eurafrica. Again, a fascist is doing that. But it's this idea about Africa, let there be a union, but Africa is going to be patriarchal and it's going to be extractive. The Europeans are there to mine, if they need to expand their territories, to settle people there. But the Africans are just there to supply the materials. And how is this still continue today? Despite the EU talking about all this stuff about partnerships, here's a good example of their rank hypocrisy. You know, as everybody does, about the problems in Eastern Congo, Rwanda supporting the M28, and Rwanda and Uganda, but mainly Rwanda, extracting minerals from Eastern Congo, literally looting Congo. What did the EU do about this? This paragon of peace. Remember, the EU, a lot of them, they're also members of NATO. They back the US, whatever it does to provoke Russia, to bomb Libya to smithereens. They give the United States and its aggressive foreign policy maximum cover. So, what do they do about this conflict in Eastern Congo? They sanction people who are outwardly fighting there. So, members of the Congolese government, anybody associated with M28, and commanders in the Rwandan army. Okay. What did they do about Rwanda? The EU signed a critical minerals deal with Rwanda, the country which is exploiting Congo. Now, we've seen what's happened in Gaza. We've seen the way the Epstein class of rulers
oh,
kowtow to infringements of freedom of speech in both America and in Britain.
mm-hmm.
These, so they can no longer preach morality, international law, and a rules-based order. Well, I'm finishing off with the EU. They signed a critical minerals deal with Rwanda. What does that mean? The same minerals that are being stolen from the Congo.
Mm-hmm.
You are
Mm-hmm.
signing a deal with a country that is doing that extracting. I mean, how could you not be more wantonly hypocritical than that? I'll leave it to you and the audience to mull and come back with.
Um, thank you, thank you. There's a lot I could say. There's a lot I could say. Um, read up, family. Read up. Get clued up. Start by going to Mr. Mackinday's channel and subscribing, and just binge watch a few of his videos. Um, binge watch a few of his videos. They're quite enlightening. There's not a lot of commentary on a lot of them, so it's just it's content that you can just imbibe in small little ditties, and that will kind of make you smile and kind of make you smile. Once you watch enough of them, you'll see the pattern I was talking about at the beginning of this live. Anyway, yeah, get clued up, family. We'll have to have Mr. Makinde back because um plot twist, he comes from a family that was at the forefront of all of this stuff going on in Africa in the 60s, 70s, and all that period as well. So he's seen a few things up close, I should imagine himself. So if he will permit us, we'll have him back at some future time. Thank you so much, Mr. Makinde, for joining us this evening. And
It was
I'm
my
just
pleasure.
yeah, yeah, it was really it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So yeah, anyway, like I said, check out his work. From Kush to Compton. If you can wait on the back end of this, Mr. Mackin, then we can just talk afterwards. But yeah, from Kush to Compton, it's been Trill Black. Um talking to Adeyinka Makinde. Yeah. See you next time in the next one. Peace, everyone. Bye.